Dr. Monson received her master's degree in community mental health and worked as an inpatient and outpatient psychotherapist in Illinois and Michigan before entering Michigan State University to become an osteopathic physician. Dr. Monson founded her family medicine and obstetrics practice before joining the faculty of MSU Com, the Department and Family of Community Medicine. She served in multiple roles before becoming the chairperson. Dr. Monson was the general principal investigator of the HRSA administration grant to establish geriatric fellowships across Michigan. This important body of work led her to write the book titled Aging Optimally, Essential Tools for Healing the Pain of Body, Mind, and Spirit. Dr. Monson is an author and nationally known speaker. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Carol Monson.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. So tonight is something I'd like to keep informal. So if you've got questions as I'm going through something, let me know and I'll try and give you a further explanation. So tonight I'm not a professor. I'm just a human being like you are. And human beings have a tough time in this world. We get hit with all sorts of things, stress and things that hurt us, that wound us. And the life is a journey from birth to death, hopefully with a lot of good and happy times in between. And that's the first line of my book. And life's been an incredible journey for me, sometimes sort of a roller coaster. And, I don't know about you, but right now, it seems like we're living through very, very stressful times. So part of my reason for writing this book was to look at what we can do, because my research showed me that stress is not a good thing for us. And so I'm going to share a little piece of research, but I hope I'm going to share more common sense than anything else. So educational objectives. We need to do this when we do continuing medical education programs. And so I thought I'd bring it here. These are a little different than the ones that I've used for the doctors, but these are some of the things that I want to talk about. And that is what aging optimally preserves for us, how we can change our DNA, which nobody thought we could do that. We were told once we were born, we were stuck with that. Well, that's not the truth. Research has shown that that is very different. How life stress actually affects our immune system, and that is one of the key points in what I'm talking about tonight. I'm pretty much just dealing with the first few chapters of the book tonight. Some of these are the ones that are more research-based and actually a little more scientific to give everybody in the audience kind of a basic start. So this is not a book for, you don't have to have a PhD to read it. The first couple chapters are a little more complicated, but I'm going to talk about early life stress and what it does. One of the joys of aging is that you can't see. And so bifocals made me dizzy. And so I just get reading glasses. I have contact lenses, and they wanted to give me, one of each. And so steps become a nightmare. And for reference, falls are the major reason that people over probably 55 to 65 and above end up getting in themselves in a hospital. Because when you fall, sometimes you break things and you don't heal as well when you get older, depending on how your immune system is running. So my big message is that we have a body, mind, and spirit. All humans do. And often when you go to a physician, they will take care of your body, but and do the best they can with that, but they neglect your mind and spirit. So this is when I was a psychotherapist, that was one of the things that made me a little crazy, is when I saw some of my folks who seemed to be dealing with some medical issues. And I'd send them, why don't you go see what your doctor says about that? And they'd come back and say, oh, the doctor says I'm fine. And, there were clues to me, and I ended up being proved right over the years, but it took actually going to medical school to help me understand it. That was an aim I had in life at one point, and it was a frustrating climb. But I'm sort of glad now that I had the psychotherapy experience, because it gave me a much different appreciation for my patients when they came in to see me. I'm looking now at the slide that says to find health should be the object of the doctor. So when I got the opportunity to become a physician, I became an osteopathic physician, because in the definition of osteopathy, Andrew Taylor Still takes into consideration the whole person. And that was the basis of osteopathic medicine that enticed me. And it felt sort of like a destiny, if you will, of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to study. Because truly, when I look for health in my patients, I find much more than sometimes I bargain for. I find other areas where they're not healthy. And for years, I've introduced a lot of information to patients so that they can begin to help themselves become healthier as human beings. So the next slide, I think you're on it, talks about osteopathic medicine, but I've kind of given you the capsule of that. I'm not going to read the slides to you. Osteopathic medicine actually began with Andrew Taylor Still, as I stated. He was a physician in the Civil War, and he was also a Methodist minister. He became a physician by serving under his father, who was an MD. So that's how physicians of that time actually got trained. So he saw a lot in the Civil War, and then when he got back out of the Civil War, he was seeing medicine from, let's say, kind of the frontier point of view. And at that time, a lot of the medicines that were being given were poison, and things that you had to be very careful. He lost his wife and several children to an epidemic at that point, and that's when he said there's got to be a better way than this. So that is the capsule history of Dr. Still. Next slide. So body, mind, and spirit is what is addressed in aging optimally. And the grant he talked about earlier actually took that as a basis. All of the geriatric programs that I had seen actually pretty much dealt with the body and very little with the mind and spirit. And so that was the piece that we sold the government on in terms of actually training our medical students and training our residents and fellows in geriatric medicine to start taking care of their patients a little differently with mind and spirit in mind. So I'm going to, next slide. I'm going to talk just briefly about homeostasis. And what homeostasis means is balance. And that is kind of what life is. It's a balancing act. And our body knows how to do that in terms of its chemical makeup and so forth. But when you're trying to balance, kind of like being on a high wire, you can't go too far this way and you can't go too far this way, or you're going to fall off. Well, that's kind of how the body is too. That as you age, that path kind of gets more narrow. And so homeostasis or balance is the thing that you need to keep in mind as you age. So the body is the container of mind and spirit. And what I learned, one of the first things is that your body wants to heal itself, and it will go to extreme lengths to do so. When I was studying and actually in a surgical suite and so forth, learning how to be an osteopathic physician, I would see situations where a patient had cancer in their body, and the omentum, which is it's sort of an organ that nobody talks about, but it's like the fatty apron that sits underneath your skin and within your muscular area in the abdomen. That omentum would actually start to heal and put a separation between that cancer and the healthier tissue. It was like it was trying to control the situation that was getting out of control. But other ways, people are told they'll never walk again. And it's amazing to see what people can do. And we'll talk a little about mind. Mind is what the body pays attention to. Kind of like when we're children, we think our parents are all knowing, and we're often wrong. But at that point, that's kind of how your body is. What you tell your body in your mind sticks with it, and your body, like that child, wants to please the parent. And so what happens is that the mind sometimes is thinking all sorts of thoughts. We all have this voice in our head that tells us, oh, you shouldn't have done that. What did you do that for? That's stupid. And this voice, it's the one that keeps you up at night when you've had a stressful day, and it keeps talking to you and you can't shut it off. And that is the mind, but the body doesn't get it. The body says, well, what do you want me to do? And so it becomes a confusing situation. So the mind is part of what creates that disease and the issues that we sometimes have with stress, because the mind tells the body it's confused, the body gets confused, it's trying to do this balance act, and everything kind of ends up being not so good. So spirit is actually the thing that sometimes keeps that person going who the doctor has told that they're never going to walk again. Spirit is our life force. It's the thing inside us that makes us want to be with other people. It makes us want to love other people. It gives us messages. It connects us with other people, and it connects us with the universe. So that if you believe in macrocosms and microcosms, that, what's happening in us is part of everything that's happening in the world, you begin to understand the chaos that's out there. Because if you look around, it's everywhere. We're not the only place that stuff is happening. You look at France and what's going on there. You look at Russia and the Ukraine and all of these situations that we're hearing about constantly. And that is what creates stress in our body, mind, and spirit. So there are choices there. So what is optimally, or what is aging optimally at this point? So this goes back to my grant also. You can read the 3 definitions here. I only was working with the first 2. I found resilient aging later. But what aging optimally is to me, and because these glasses aren't helping a lot, it is actually my combination of all of those 3. In my grant, I called it aging, or optimal aging. And when I started writing this book, which was much later, it seemed to me that this resilient aging piece really fit in. So it is having the ability to function in life is vital. Actively engaging physically, functionally, cognitively, emotionally, socially, spiritually is necessary. Maintaining our ability to negotiate, adapt, manage stress and trauma, and to bounce back and enjoy our life is all vital. And enjoying life is the goal of this whole thing. That's the bottom line. So aging, what is aging? Well, aging occurs both intrinsically within us and extrinsically. So intrinsically is about what the body's sort of doing when you're not aware. It's making cells, it's growing cells, it's destroying cells and turning them over and keeping things going. So there's a lot to do with DNA and the fact that as your cells age, they don't make the same kind of DNA, and ultimately they die. And hopefully the body takes care of that and gets rid of them. There's been a lot of news or articles and so forth that I've seen talking about zombie cells. Has anybody heard of zombie cells? So zombie cells are these aging cells that stick around. They no longer make DNA, but they still have the power to make other substances, hormones, and depending on where they are, and substances. And I'll use one of the things you may have heard a lot about in COVID-19, cytokines. Cytokines are things that need to be in balance. And there are diseases such as HIV and COVID where cytokines end up either being too less or too much. And so the body then starts destroying things. And that's what happened in the early stages of HIV, was that the body's immunity was compromised. In COVID, actually, people produced too many cytokines, and that was what was creating the damage in organs, such as the lungs and the kidneys and the heart and the brain and so forth, were these excess cytokines. So that's intrinsic aging. Now, that accounts, it depending on person, it accounts for up to, I'd say 25 to 30% of your aging. And it's more so in people, in some people than other people, depending on, you know, where they've been to now and what kind of diseases they've experienced in their life. Extrinsic aging is the things called lifestyle, the amount of stress, it's your exercise level, your income, all of that, who you live with, who you live near. And actually, when I started writing the book, I did not know there's a whole new branch of medicine called lifestyle medicine. And it's interesting because I actually talk about a lot of the things that they talk about, but I talk about them a little differently. But this extrinsic aging is the piece that is kind of the unknown, and that you have some control over, more control than the intrinsic thing. So next we're going to talk about epigenetics a little bit. And this is the study of inherited changes that appear in our DNA and in our genes that can't be explained by traditional genetics. And this is where that piece about our DNA changing actually comes from. A lot of the things that we have been learned over the period of time since they were able to actually split off DNA and look at genes and so forth. And what they found in doing that is some changes they couldn't actually explain at the time. And so the science of epigenetics is to actually look at that and try and figure it out. Well, they have figured it out. They've found that if we're exposed to things either in utero or later, toxic substances, and other things such as too much alcohol, a lot of drugs and so forth, it actually begins to bathe our brain and so forth in sort of a toxic mix that then it starts to actually make changes to try and get back some balance. So it's one of the reasons that it's so hard to quit smoking, quit drinking, quit taking illegal substances or legal substances, is that if you do it on a regular basis, your brain gets used to it and it begins to change your DNA, so that if you try and rehab or quit or change your behavior, it's so easy because your body is used to this other toxic mix and it wants it back. So it takes a lot longer to make changes to go back the other way. But it's not all negative. There is the positive piece, and that is that if you are drinking clean water, if you're eating nutritious food, if you're exercising regularly, getting high quality sleep, practicing stress management, social connection, and avoidance of risky substances, your brain actually enhances its DNA. So think about this in terms of what we saw with the mothers who had crack babies. And all of these situations where kids were in difficult situations in terms of getting clean food, clean water, etc. And you begin to understand how this DNA changes, because then, if those babies have babies, this begins to change the DNA structure of their offspring. So if you want healthy DNA, you have to practice good, healthy habits, when you're in the stage of making babies. So there's some people in this room that are still there. For a lot of us, it's gone way by the wayside. So, but certainly something that you can think about. So stress and inflammation are the enemies to health, and the stress and inflammation cause us to age. So I'm going to define stress the way the researchers do. So when I was doing the research on this piece, this was how they pulled together a meta-analysis of 300 different studies. And I'm not going to quote who did it or what the name is or whatever. I put a lot of this into my book because I've read books that I feel like people grab things out of the sky and put them down in a book. So I decided I wasn't going to do that. So defining some of this, there's research that backs up all of the things I say in the other chapters. And so that's kind of what makes it complicated. But this piece of information about stress is important. Acute stress in a short term actually sort of puts our body on alert. And it's not a bad thing as long as it comes to an end in a very short time. And that's short at this point. I would say less than 6 months, or even more like a month or 3 months would be considered acute stress. Stressful events we all have. Speaking to an audience is one of the ones that I actually use as an example in my book, but taking boards, was certainly one for me. Getting a license, having to go through some of those tests, those were all stressful experiences. So the chronic stress is where we start getting into real problems. And chronic stress is considered anything over 6 months that continues on. Now, there are also what are called distant stress, and I don't know, that's the next slide. And this is things that have happened, for example, people who come back from war with PTSD, and people who've been sexually abused and so forth. Those are things that are in their background at that point and are going to create stress and may come back from time to time. So those are things clearly that need to be treated. Next slide. But the big thing that you need to know, and that is that your stress can be extrinsic. And some of those that I had listed, or you can make your own stress. And that's the intrinsic one. And that is that voice in your head that tells you, oh, you got to do this, you got to do that, you're not good enough if you don't do this. And so it's getting that under control that really is a major piece in terms of stress control. You want to do the next slide? So these are some of the things I just sort of picked out that I think you can identify with. And listening to the voice in our head is certainly one of the prominent ones. But thinking that you have to keep up with what's happening with somebody else who lives in the neighborhood. And you can tell yourself all sorts of things, whether you believe them or not. Your body may believe them. You've said it in your mind, and that stress gets passed on to your body. And that's probably the biggest thing that I want to talk to about that. Now, going into the stress analysis, which at this point, we do all sorts of stupid things when we're under stress. We're kind of dolts sometimes in terms of how we take care of ourselves. And these are just some of the things that happen. And all of those things create other reactions in our body with our hormones. And when I say hormones, I'm talking about things that make your heart go faster, and things that make you eat stuff that raises your blood sugar, or behavior that actually changes how your body has to cope with what it's dealing with at whatever moment in time. So these are, again, some of the research findings that tell you the details of some of the reactions. I'm not going to go through all of those, but the big one is inflammation, and that is stress creates inflammation, and inflammation is the enemy. And you'll hear me repeat that multiple times. So going further in the stress analysis, researchers have found that it begins to change your immune system. And this is what happens in a time-limited period. But when the stress goes on and on, what happens is that your body becomes less reactive to things like catecholamines, which is adrenaline, and so your body secretes more of it, and you end up with a continuing reaction. The same is true of insulin, so that that's where we end up with issues with diabetes, because people become immune to their own insulin. So chronic stress is not a good thing. So in terms of the research, it's both physical stress and psychological stress. And again, it begins to age your immune system, so that your immune system isn't as active in going after things like viruses. And maybe, it is actually some of those pieces of the immune system that nab off cancer cells. And so what may happen in that situation is that if your body is too busy paying attention to stress, it may not be paying attention. We all have cancer cells in our body that our body takes care of in terms of trying to maintain that balance. But if that balance is upset by too much of that, that changing of that line as we go forward, the body is not as efficient as nabbing off some of those cells. So again, your immune system can become resistant. I don't know if we're go forward to the one on stress and aging. So again, some of the things that actually have been shown research-wise is that if you're in a continual caregiver mode, which many people get into when they are living with someone who has some type of impairment, that caregiving also can be one of those stressful things that actually creates issues for you in terms of your own immune system. This was shown in people in a study that actually talked about the difference in immunologic absorption of vaccines. They actually found that people who were caregivers, they took blood before and after they'd been administered a vaccine, and found that if they were in a caregiving role, it actually wore on them, and they were less likely to develop good immunity from the vaccine that they got. So we're going now to stress and early life stress. One of the things the researchers who did that 300 multi-study analysis found was that those people who in childhood have been exposed to stressful situations may have a less vital immune system to begin with because of the stress at that early age. We're going to move through some of this. So go to the one that says early life stress. And I am going to share some of this because this is pretty major stuff. In 1975, a physician by the name of Vincent Felitti was working at an HMO, Kaiser Permanente, in San Diego. And one of the things that they had the ability to do was look at records from a large group of patients. And they found that they were, well, one of their pieces was to actually do some preventative healthcare. And they had groups for people who particularly had issues with obesity and so forth. And the doctor observed that in his groups, that there were people who had developed weight loss habits, and they were getting rid of their excess weight, and suddenly they'd drop out. And so he checked with his colleagues, and they found something similar. And so they started talking about it and looked at some of these folks that had done this, and they found that they had some things in common, one of which was childhood abuse. So they sent out a survey, and if you've ever gotten these surveys, a lot of people don't do them. And you're lucky if you get a 10%, 15, if you get 20% of them back, you are, thinking, hey, I got something here. Well, they sent out over 13,000 and got over 70% back. So that was amazing. And if you go to the next slide, these are the things that they found out that they structured their questionnaire, and these were the things that they actually asked about, and people answered and sent back the questionnaire. So in terms of analyzing their results, if you go to the next study, they found out that 50% of them reported at least one instance of being abused, and abuse at this point was under the age of 18. So, abuse goes because the brain of someone is not fully developed, at other ages. 18 was listed as the cutoff, but and if you look, also 25% reported 2 instances, and some of them reported 3 or 4 instances. So in terms of then correlating to their health chart at that point in time, it was found that they were far more likely to have disease as they grew older. And some of this was their coping mechanism, that some people coped with smoking more, some people went out and joined gangs, some people had alcohol abuse, and these were their ways of coping as children, and they spilled over into their health issues as adults. So if you think about the DNA thing I talked about earlier, this kind of fits into it. So these are the bases. You go to the ACE testing. So if you're curious, I did not put a piece of the questionnaire or the whole questionnaire in this study, but this is a website that you can go to, and you can see the questions. You can take the questions if you want, and it's up to you. I actually did this for physicians, and so I was very surprised because I asked for a hand count of who had heard about the ACEs study, and it was amazing to me the number of physicians who had never heard or were aware of the whole issue. Clearly, what happened at Kaiser Permanente is that they increased their groups in terms of awareness and in terms of helping people to cope with their life in a different way than they had before. So this is a basis of some of the things that are in the book about how you look at your life, and how you look at success and happiness. All of those are sort of like bringing along the thoughts of what happens to you as a child and what decisions you can make as you go into your future life. And those are the chapters of the book that are they're scientific, but this is kind of the groundwork on which that research was done and where I went forward. So we're going to talk briefly about the Heart Math Institute. This is something I thought you might be interested in. This is a nonprofit research organization that's actually been going on since 1991. Now, I had not heard of this until probably 10 years, well, probably 15 years ago. And I actually went through some of this, but the first thing I did, there was a downloadable free book. I went back there not too long ago as I was updating some things and found out now they're charging for it. But, it was a summary of all the research that's been done over the world. It's not just in the US. And so their mission is to help people bring their physical, mental, and emotional systems into balanced alignment with their heart's intuitive guidance. So in terms of the man who runs this research program is someone by the name of Roland McCready, and he's the author of this downloadable unfree book. At this point, I think it's $10 or something. I've got my copy, so I kept it in my research file. So anyway, they all over the world, scientists have been looking at the electrophysiology of intuition and the interconnectivity to all things to prove the heart is central to managing stress, increasing coherence, and deepening our connection to others. So one of the things they have proven that there is an electromagnetic field around each of us. And it varies in terms of how open you are at the time, to whatever is happening. So it expands, when you're thinking positive things and thoughts of love. It contracts when you're feeling more negative. And this has been shown. There are neurological, biochemical, biophysical, and energetic waves. And this is, you should see that at the bottom of that slide. So that all of these things interact. They've actually shown that the heart, which they previously thought was controlled by the brain, is not. That it is its own central organ, and it at times sends messages to the brain that the brain listens to. So it goes back and forth. Now, I'm only going to briefly touch on something called the microbiome. How many of you know what the microbiome is? Okay. So the microbiome is what is in what's called our gut. And most of it resides in the area of the connection between the small bowel and the colon, but it's trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoans, and so forth that mostly can be our friends if we have a good diet. So the heart interacts with that. The heart interacts with the brain, and all of them are sending messages back and forth to each other all the time. And this is proven in the research that I've looked to as the basis in these first few chapters of the book. But the heart now has been shown that it releases catecholamines, but it also releases something called oxytocin, which oxytocin is sometimes nicknamed the love hormone. And it is produced by both men and women. Women produce more, particularly if they happen to be pregnant, because it has other uses. But so truly, the heart can release oxytocin, when it is in love. And truly, you can experience a broken heart when someone that you love leaves you, whether it be leaving permanently or, as in transformation to another world or another universe, or whether they walk out on you. So that these chemicals interact with things from the brain as well. So going forward, it's now called a heart brain, this particular area, and it controls itself. And as I said, interacts with both your gut and all sorts of organs in your body. But it's fascinating. The part that I want to get to is the one that research indicates, and it is, there are three, yeah, you got it. So physical, mental, and spiritual. This is where I go back to body, mind, and spirit, that the heart is part and has been proven that this actually makes a difference in your life. When you are thinking positive thoughts, your brain and your body react in a positive way. When you're thinking negative thoughts, it does the same, but in a way that is not as happy. So that, part of this resilience that we need in aging is to actually start looking at how we can tell ourselves, get that voice in our head to actually think in a positive way, and to be positive in terms of our interactions with other people, but first in terms of our interactions with ourselves. So cardiac coherence is the systematic or logical connection of consistency with integration of diverse elements, relationships, and values. Coherence is actually something that you can develop in terms of meditation will help, yoga helps, some type of experience where you are actually kind of in control of your physiologic body and actually having an experience. That this particular nonprofit has a profit arm as well. And they've actually developed a program, and this is the next slide. And there's a website down there, but they have sold their program to many Fortune 500 companies, and it's being used in personnel relations to actually train people how to get in control of their own heart rate. And by doing this, you're more able to think clearly and to actually absorb knowledge and behave better in terms of your life in a more positive way. So you don't have to take their program, but clearly it is an opportunity. I talk about meditation and yoga and some of the other things and the research that shows why they're valid or why they're not valid in the book. So we're going to go to the summary now, and that is just a redefining or saying again the definition of aging optimally. But the big thing is enjoying life is the goal, and that should be the goal of each of us. We can get caught up in the news. We can get caught up in the election, which I am so glad is over. We can get caught up in what's going on between Russia and the Ukraine, or we can turn it off for a while and just think about what's going on in our life and, maybe make our level of stress a little bit less. So aging is affected by intrinsic and extrinsic aging. Clearly they're working on compounds to see if they can clear those zombie cells. And there's a whole book on, some of the things they're actually using a few drugs off label and researching them. There's a whole book by the guy who is taking using medication that is currently being used for transplants, and how that is likely to clear those senescent cells. So those are things that I really haven't done the research on at this point. So the next is what I call the essentials of aging optimally. Those actually are printed out for you, and if you don't have a copy, get them. This is my ABCs of essentials of aging optimally, and it's what I think, we all need to do. We may not be there yet, but they say you only live once. Well, Charles Schultz says, no, that's wrong. We only die once. We live every day. So go out and live every day that you have at this point, and that is my wish for you. In terms of going into, I'm just going to give you a little bit of what's in the book. So some of the chapters, I can't rattle them off, so I have a cheat sheet here. So starting with chapter 5, that is the pursuit of success and happiness, the pursuit of love, confronting our fears, understanding and communicating emotions, acknowledging your life script, evaluating and taking control of your stress, venturing into relationships, experiencing romantic relationships, and awareness, acknowledgement, and enjoyment of your sexuality. That's part 1. In part 2, I go into a lot of the different philosophies of medicine through the years, traditional Chinese medicine, a little about Native American medicine, a lot about osteopathic medicine, which I know the most about, and some of the things that each of these offer in terms of the modalities. And so I talk about herbalism, Ayurveda, chiropractic, homeopathy, mind-body medicine, naturopathy, and then go into some of the things that are most used by people in our population at this point who are looking for alternative, complementary, and integrative approaches. So that's where a lot of the other research is in terms of which of those things have been shown to work in terms of something that you can try to help you take control of your own health situation. And so there are a few other things that are more new age in terms of things like esoteric healing. I also go into spiritual healers and some of the other things that are out there, crystal healing, and a lot of other things like therapeutic touch, healing touch, Reiki, and massage, and a lot of the things that many people are using these days as a way of trying to get beyond what medicine has become at this point. I have real concerns about organized medicine, and it's going through its own crises. And I, as a physician who taught other physicians, I just hope that some of them got some of these messages that I put into their curriculum at some point. But I practiced the kind of medicine that I am hoping that my junior colleagues will practice again. It's gotten so complex trying to get even a medical appointment before 2 months, or being online with somebody instead of actually having them examine you and put a stethoscope on your chest. Anyhow, my contact information is up here. I have a Substack post that I do once a week. You can reach that through my Substack column. I have an email list that if you put your email address, I'm not selling it. I will put it on my list, and I will put it on my Substack list, and you can look at some of my posts, which have actually mimicked chapters and pieces of my book. In terms of, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. If I can't answer your question, I'll try and get back with you if you give me your email address. Dennis.
Someplace within the last week, somebody, don't know who, I've been the internet, made a statement that the human body could easily live to 140 to 150 years old. I was wondering if you had seen anything.
Maybe someday.
I feel that.
At this point, the body, I don't know if, we don't know how everything will change. There may be all sorts of things. I mean, we didn't know about the DNA thing, until they got the CRISPR thing to, cut up the pieces of DNA and so forth. And that was a huge discovery in terms of the microbiome. That research is still very fresh in terms of what illnesses it can actually begin to heal. I go into some of the things in diet you can do to make your microbiome stronger. Microbiomes don't like the things that we have in our Western diet. So, maybe with dietary changes, maybe if these drugs show that they don't kill you, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I do know there was some research that just came out that I haven't gotten it. It'll be in when I get around to the next book, but that all cells have memory. And that was a piece that was a little less proven, in some ways. There was some research in mind-body medicine, that talked about the ability of the cell to control the cell wall. And that was proven by one of the folks and whose name is escaping me at the moment, but, so I can't answer your question, and I don't know if I'll live long enough to.
We'll get there together.
Any other questions that I can answer at this point? So if somebody has a question, and I think my email address was on there. If you put something in the subject line about either AgeAlive or aging optimally, I get so many, I clean out email and I have 7,000 messages again, so I will look at a subject line more likely than I will a name that or whatever, but I would be happy to try and address questions.
Can I ask
So-
a question? You say we should control inflammation,
Yeah,
and this is what I don't know how to do. I know some people say they take turmeric or something like
well,
that.
and there are all sorts of things, but the biggest thing is, if you remember that balance line that I talked
Right.
about, it's trying to keep things in balance, and that means, nothing in too much excess. Whether there's a whole piece on supplements and so forth. Turmeric is not one that is highlighted in my book at this point. It may be at another point, but so a lot of those spices or herbals have come through the centuries in different kinds of cooking. There is a piece on the longevity of the people with the Mediterranean diet. So in terms of some of the things that people believe at this point, that using organic vegetables and organic meat in the sense of, versus something that's been raised under stressful conditions may make some difference, but the biggest thing is your attitude. Keeping a positive attitude decreases inflammation. So, not exposing yourself to stressful conditions, like listening to the news, too much, give yourself some points at which, you allow yourself so much of this, per day, and, so it's a frame of mind, that meditating decreases inflammation. Some other, massage may do it. Adding spice to your life in terms of some of the things that have been used over the years in Indian cooking. Turmeric is one of those. It can be used in other things, but all of those things. Now, one of the things I do talk a little bit about supplements. As I said, that one isn't in there, but if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You can look at supplements on the internet, and everybody's gonna, help you lose weight, decrease inflammation, make your brain clearer. And I do take some supplements, but in that situation, what I try to do is not take anything more than one new thing every 30 days. And I see if I feel better as a result of taking it versus non-taking it. And I don't, keep taking things that haven't seemed to make a difference for me. And you can spend all sorts of things on pills for turmeric and, pills with cinnamon in them and other herbs, cook with it. And, add some spice to your life that way. Some of those spices have been shown by that College of Lifestyle Medicine. They actually do some pieces on it. But yeah, the bigger thing is stress and inflammation. So keeping your life as calm as you can when the world's going crazy around you. It's not easy. Yeah.
So another way of reducing stress, this is work for me, and I'm sure that it's going to work for many people, is just walking outside in nature. Because it will, for me, it's helped me ground my feelings, because sometimes I'm overwhelmed.
Well, and that's part of, you can do a meditative walk. So there are lots of ways to meditate. One of them is by walking. Another is Tai Chi or Qigong, which are martial arts, which also are both covered. All of those things are pieces that people have done through the centuries, and we in our life don't necessarily understand that they had stress too. And so stress is relative, and it's how you perceive it. And so it's often your perception and also what makes you feel better. So your meditative walk is, works for you. Keep doing it. But there may be other things that you haven't thought of. So when you are feeling good, when you're releasing good chemicals in your body, that is going to reduce inflammation. Helpful?
Yes, very.
Thank you. Our next presentation is going to be on December 3rd with Dr. Mark Voigt on colossal black hole eruptions. Dr. Mark Voigt works in MSU's Department of Physics and Astronomy, so December 3rd. Thank you.
December 3rd. Thank you so much.
So if anyone is interested in purchasing a book, they're here for purchase, and I will personally sign them so you can have an author signed copy.
Let's say it's Kurt. Okay, she's.
Like the flower.
Yeah, yes, I know.
Dr. Monson, they put it down next to the
Okay, she can look it up.
Either one. It's cheaper by cash, 20 for cash and 20.93 if I have to be like.
You know how much they're on Amazon?
Or, yeah.